a radiogenic production.
BLB, Sounds from the Past, Memories of Pirate Radio and Stories of Bray Local Broadcasting. Episode 2. Ah yes, it was June 1979 and Southside Radio had closed down, in Bray anyway. This was because, in a nutshell, the owner of the transmitter and therefore the radio station, one Andrew Coffey, perhaps felt under pressure to dispense with some music programmes in favour of speech-based programmes, which is what John Murphy, Doug Maguire and myself, along with a host of other presenters, had suggested. Andrew had taken his transmitter off to South Dublin, and we were all left looking at each other saying, well, there's only one thing for it. Let's set up our own radio station in Bray. I'm Mark Quinn, and over these episodes we're delving into a long-gone era, the late 1970s and through the 1980s, and the heady days of a pirate radio station called Bray Local Broadcasting, or BLB, that had a profound effect on those who were in its orbit.
We're on the air now.
BLB. They were the authentic voices of the people of Bray.
Yesterday afternoon on the seafront.
I would like to wish BLB a very happy and successful future.
I don't think any community is truly that without having its own radio station.
The request is starting to flow in at the moment, and if you would like...
Bray needs this communication, and I think communication will open things up for everyone.
And welcome to another Balcall Community Council programme.
There was the Meath Road listeners, there was the Wolftown Square listeners, there was the Bogall Road.
Hey, oh, Glen Curtin. A sad little ditty, a bad salad. Sorry, a sad ballad.
Sitting on a dart, coming home somewhere, I liked your programme this morning. Oh, what on earth was that rubbish you played? It was wonderful.
BLB, the magnificent service that it provided at the times, it really was the voice, the glue that made us what we are today. I think the town rediscovered its vibrant identity.
Before we move on, let's meet another colourful member of BLB, Daphne Mitchell, who for some reason was always in hot water. Daphne recalls here 3 bad memories and situations that only she could find herself in.
I used to do a late night programme on a Friday night as well as afternoon mummy programmes. And there was a knock at the door and this man came in and he put a gun to my head. And one thing we were told, obviously, do not talk about religion or the IRA, because that was the time when everything was going on. And this man put a gun to my head and he said, I want you to read this out. The IRA are meeting at the town hall on such and such a time tomorrow morning. And so I read it out. Obviously you would, either that or being dead on the floor. So I read that out. That was a bad memory. Another bad memory, I was asked to compare fashion shows and also judge Bonnie Baby competitions. And one Bonnie Baby competition I had to judge was somewhere in Bray. And I still can't pronounce my R, Bray, you see. Bray Local Broadcasting. Anyway, I had to compare this baby competition. And there were lots and lots of babies, and all mums love their babies. And so I chose the correct baby, and we all clapped. And some mother came at me with an umbrella and was trying to hit me on the head because I didn't choose her baby. That was another bad memory. Another memory, bad memory, I've got brilliant good memories. Another bad memory was, now and again, I read the 1 o'clock news with Adrian Kennedy. But this particular day, Adrian couldn't turn up, so I was reading it on my own. And in front of us was a glass screen, which was the second interview studio behind us. And I was just reading, good afternoon, this is the 1 o'clock news on Bray Local Broadcasting, BLB. And then I looked up and I was carrying on reading the news, and there were 3 bums. 3 men had mooned in front of me in the studio behind. They were mooning. So they expected to throw me. But I'd seen bums before, so I just carried on reading the news. So that didn't faze me.
not being made an ass of and carrying on regardless. The ever-professional Daphne Mitchell. And we'll hear more stories from Daphne and others later in this series. But now let's get back to how BLB actually started. A core group of about 10 of us were a bit wounded with no longer having a radio station to broadcast on, and with the dogged and perhaps somewhat naive determination of youth, we were going to go ahead and set up our own radio station. Doug Maguire sums up the mood of the group at the time.
Like so many Irish organisations, had been a coup overnight, a split, and we were annoyed, we were hurt, but we decided, look, that's what they want to do. Let's do our own thing.
I think we were really serious about this. Unlike many, we decided to do this properly.
John Murphy.
So having a public meeting and getting views was the starting point.
I suppose nowadays, if you want to find out if anyone is interested in getting involved in a new initiative, you'd post it on Facebook or some other social media outlet. But back in the late 1970s, with no such thing as the internet, this was not an option. So the first thing we organised was a public meeting. We got posters printed by Aidan Flynn at Central Press inviting anyone who was interested in getting involved in a new type of radio station for Bray to come along to the Royal Hotel on Monday the 2nd of July 1979 at 8 o'clock.
I wanted to get into radio. I wanted to be behind the microphone. So when this opportunity came up to do this, I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be in there.
Local musician Joe Bollard clearly had a keen interest in radio, so he went along to that rather informal public meeting.
It was one of the strangest meetings I've ever been at, because when you go into a meeting, it's usually all very hushed and very quiet, and there's somebody in the chair, ladies and gentlemen. This wasn't like that. This was, it was like going into a party. I didn't know 70 or 80% of the people there. It was explained how the station was going to work, that no one was being paid, it was all voluntary, and you were all to, because we hadn't got a library of material, use your own material. But we had to have a varied programme. It couldn't be the same pop music 10 hours a day. So I just put up my hand and say, Mr. Chairman, I want to be the first person on. Cheeky Joe Bollard as usual, and the name of my programme will be Morning Mixture, because it will be a mixture of every type, style and genre of music.
Ah, the wonderful Joe Bollard. He had never presented a live radio programme before, and straight from the off he proved to be a big hit with BLB's audience, with his warm, witty style. Because of his blindness and his unfamiliarity with a radio studio, I helped Joe with his programme in the very early days, and with the combination of youth, I was 21, and showbiz experience, Joe was in his 40s, and a seasoned musical performer, we got on like a house on fire. But more of that anon. Back to the public meeting in the Royal Hotel, and Doug Maguire again.
We decided that we were going to do music, but we were going to do a bigger range of music, and we were going to do community-orientated things.
We also set out to be all-inclusive, and we agreed we'd invite community groups within Bray to participate in making their own programmes. Alwyn Dixon was very much involved in those early days.
I don't know that the policies or ideologies for community radio were actually formed at that stage. I mean, I think it was something that we were very instrumental in forming. And everybody was asked for their opinion, and we said what we thought it should be a mixture of music and speech, that it should be democratic. We probably didn't use that word. Everybody was welcome. Everybody could get involved. It wasn't just for those in the know or whatever people thought media and broadcasting was about before that. And it was about our town, about ourselves, and about talking to each other. I always remember the phrase, talking over the garden fence. That's what the radio was going to be, that you could listen to the radio and probably maybe hear people chatting, and maybe even about your own neighbourhood, what was going on. And it was very much about the town and the people. And I think that was a new idea.
And I, for one, remember the excitement and anticipation involved in the setting up of that new idea. A radio station that was for the town and people of Bray. But, like almost every endeavour, we needed funding. So we put the call out at the meeting, and subsequently we approached potential funders.
A lot of help from Vincent Kerwin and fundraising and various people in the town. A gang of people got behind us.
And that gang of 5 funders, to whom we are eternally grateful as they were never repaid, were Ken Duff, Vincent Kerwin, Michael MacDonald, Peter Meldon and John Tuff. They each contributed 100 old pounds each, and this seed capital helped to buy the transmitter and studio equipment. We also ran a number of discos in the town to help raise funds. Interestingly, we recognised that we needed to up our skills to deal with a wider range of programming, including more speech-based radio, so that we could help others to be as good as they could be on air and in production. So I signed up for a radio production techniques course in the Ryark Communications Centre on Booterstown Avenue, Dublin, along with John Murphy, Doug Maguire and John Roach. The centre was the very place, ironically, where RTE staff received their broadcast training.
We learned how to present, we learned how to produce documentaries, how to edit tapes, how to record and edit, and we were going to utilise these new skills to teach other people, but also to develop them ourselves.
That really gave us a foundation of a philosophy of doing it properly, of trying to be, clear and communicate properly, learn the tools, which was completely different from any other station in the whole country. There was a lot of stations in Ireland by that time.
We were indeed learning new skills and really getting ready to make a proper go of this. You've got to remember that we were all in our early 20s, and looking back, we all had a sort of determined passion to get this on the air. Alwyn again.
Yeah, I think it was a really exciting time, and I think we were probably so young and so naive and knew so little about what was ahead of us that we just jumped into it. Feet first, thought this is going to be brilliant. And it was brilliant. But, as they say, if you knew then what you know now, you might not have jumped in feet first, but we did.
So with a transmitter sourced from one Paul Cotter in Stillorgan and a small amount of rudimentary studio equipment acquired, we now needed a premises. And to the rescue came a Bray business legend. I did the deal with Joe Duggan to rent a not-so-luxurious basement flat in Galtram House off Galtram Park, Bray, for £15 a week, and that flat became BLB's first home. Once we had the equipment installed and the aerial erected, we started test transmissions on 360 metres or 828 kilohertz on the medium wave band, or AM. Now, who remembers AM, listening to all that background noise and whistling which got worse at night? Once we were happy that the technology was all working, we put together a schedule and chose a launch date of Wednesday the 22nd of August, 1979 at 11 a.m.
BLB 360.
In keeping with trying to get the station off to a professional sounding start, we bought a jingles package from Bay City Studios in Dublin for I think around £300. The jingles were voiced by broadcasting legend Tony Allen, the former Radio Caroline DJ.
BLB, serving Bray, 11 to 11, every day.
In a few minutes, we'll hear the actual recording from all those years ago. But first, here's Doug Maguire, remembering preparing for that first day.
I had the privilege and the honour, to be honest, of being the first voice heard when the station opened. I had been asked by Mark Quinn and John Murphy, would I put a few words together announcing the radio station and what we stood for? And don't ask me now what I said, but I know at the time I spent some time writing out a couple of paragraphs outlining the goals and the objectives of what BLB radio was about. And I was chuffed to be asked to do that, and it meant a lot to me.
You are tuned to 360 meters medium wave, 828 kilohertz AM. Good morning and welcome to BLB, Bray Local Broadcasting.
You know, it's fascinating for me listening to Doug's voice on that recording from 1979, and particularly what he's saying. It's really impressive that we were so clear about our philosophy for BLB from the very beginning.
And the aim of everyone here on BLB is to bring the radio to you, the people, and to bring you, the people, to the radio.
John Murphy explains how we were thinking at the time.
The fundamental principle in our community radio philosophy was about giving people a voice, getting away from the elitism that broadcasting was only a one-way thing. In our case, it was a two-way thing. People could talk, hear what was going on, and it dealt with issues of the day immediately.
So that briefly is what BLB is all about.
You know, all this giving people a voice and broadcasting not being too elitist sounds like the beginnings of what has become the ultimate communication tool, the internet, if that's not too grandiose. But those were our genuine ambitions as a bunch of 20-somethings.
I would like to wish BLB a very happy and successful future. I have been impressed by the ideas and philosophy of this station as outlined to me by Paddy Feely and Douglas Maguire.
To, as it were, officially launch the station on air, we somehow managed to record and edit together some eminent voices from Bray. People like Councillor Michael Ledwidge, who was chairman of Bray Urban District Council at the time.
Anything which combines the people of the town into a community is to be welcomed. Good luck to BLB.
And what independent councillor Bridgie Hannon said in her recording proved that she was way ahead of her time.
Bray needs this communication to keep it going and to make everyone aware of everybody else. It's a big town, it's spreading out, and I think communication will open things up for everyone.
There were several other speakers that day, and after the introductions from most of the Bray Urban District Council of 1979, I jumped in behind the microphone for my first broadcast on BLB.
And before we start today's broadcasting, a big thank you to Councillor Michael Ledwidge, the chairman of the Bray Urban District Council, Councillor Neil McHugh, Councillor Aidan Murphy, Councillor John Byrne, Councillor Bridget Hannon, and finally Mrs.
That sure is a lot of councillors. Right, shall we hear from the very first presenter of the very first programme on BLB?
On that particular morning, Mark Quinn rang on my bell and we headed off. Mark and I chatted on the way down about me, first of all. I pointed out to Mark about the fact that I couldn't see wasn't to make any difference. I wanted to be treated like a normal human being, or as normal as possible, and not to be embarrassed about giving out to me or telling me off if I do the wrong thing. So immediately it clicked. We got on well. And I can remember to this day, walked into the studio, and Mark brought me over to the chair, and just as I sat down, he shook my hand and he says, "Good luck, Joe, I'm sure you'll make it."
Joe Bollard here. Good morning, folks. This is the Morning Mixture Show. Sounds like a dose of medicine, doesn't it? Well, if the morning mixture is a dose of medicine, and a dose of medicine makes you feel better, all the better for that.
Mark had a good knack of telling me where I was going wrong. I wasn't a stupid idiot or a clown. Or, Joe, I wouldn't do it that way if I was you. I'd suggest you do it this way. And that's what really it was a big help to me. And I think that's why we got on so well.
On that opening night, in a feat of engineering, we ran an audio cable all the way from the Royal Starlight Hotel disco back to the studio in Galtram House, and we transmitted the disco live on air. Peter Carroll, who was there at the time, remembers.
Mark Quinn was the DJ that night. Also present that I remember were John Murphy and John Tuff. And I remember them both wearing these kind of white t-shirts with BLB Radio Roadshow. I think it was in kind of black, red and blue writing. And they linked with anchorman John Matthews in the studio, who were taking regular links to see how things were going.
A very young Ger Hayes was also in the audience that night.
It was great. I mean, for people of our age group that were 14, 15, this was something special, something new. We sort of felt something good was happening. And there was a Teddy Boy dancing competition which I'd won, and I won a $5. Afterwards, I was interviewed by Mark Quinn for the radio. And Mark jokingly said, "Sure, you must come down sometime and spin a few discs." So that was it. I was back knocking on the door the following week with an armful of records.
And that visit to the studio was the start of a regular spot on the station for Ger Hayes, and what turned out to be one of BLB's longest running programmes, the Rock and Roll Revival Show. From that very first day on the 22nd of August 1979, BLB never looked back. Joe Bollard took to broadcasting like a duck to water, and quickly Morning Mixture became one of the station's most listened to programmes.
How are you this morning? Welcome to Morning Mixture. As I say, how are you? Good form, I hope.
Joe had the advantage of knowing the music, knowing the people, and knowing himself. He was not there to pretend to be anything other than Joe Bollard. And actually, Joe Bollard was what people liked.
All sorts of things that will keep you informed as to what's happening in the area and surrounding areas as well. And of course,
in 1979 on RTE Radio, the Great Gay Burn had a massive audience from 9 to 11. So we decided to pitch Joe Bollard's show from 11 to 1, and it proved successful. In fairness to Joe, he put the preparation in and was constantly trying new ideas, like his seaweed, for example.
In the morning time, I'd listen to the weather forecast on RTE and I'd say, right, it's going to be a nice day in Bray today. I'd say, good morning. Well, just in case you don't know, I have at home a piece of seaweed that I hang out the window, and if it comes in dry, it's going to be a fine day. This was an imaginary piece of seaweed, but people believed I had this piece of seaweed, so much so that they'd either meet me in the street on the way down or ring in and say, what does Joe's seaweed say?
We will have lots more rain. It was damp, exceedingly so wet actually, when I drew it in from the window this morning. Now, it wasn't wet from the rain the night before or from last night. The end of it was wet, which means that it was could happen this evening. So there you are. You have been warned, Ed. You have been warned. Here we are, getting us off to a lively finger-tapping start.
So one particular day, it was a bit naughty, but I probably wasn't thinking, a bit hyper, and I said, well, the seaweed says that it's going to be it was a lovely summer's day. It's going to be a nice warm day today. So, okay, missus, you've got plenty of time to hang your knickers out on the line. And you shouldn't have said that. But anyway, I rapped on and went on. There was nobody complained until I went home.
Whoops. Well, I suppose the moral of the story is to think before you speak. Joe Bollard went on to continue with his programme on BLB right through its 9 years of broadcasting life. He worked on all manner of shows, including outside broadcasts, and worked with various producers, including one John Bock McCann.
To work with Joe was a wonderful experience, especially when he was doing an outside broadcast.
I only knew him as Bock.
We have a button you press on the desk. He can talk to you in between songs, whatever.
Modern day guy.
And he would come in and would say, right, this is what the playlist is, but it could be subject to change, right?
He was the first guy that asked me had I got any ZZ Top albums. I had never heard of ZZ, I hadn't got a clue.
You know, you're live on air, and he says, right, straight after this break, he says, we're going to have a particular song.
This one came in from Betty as well. This one I'm doing off the top of my head. It's the Pavarotti track and his version of Panis Angelicus, if we've got it down there in the studio at the moment.
It wasn't in the pile. So I had literally 40 seconds to get out into the library, find the song, bring it in, bang.
Okay, right, 829-359. Here's Pavarotti just to sing for you.
And when he heard that he got it, that was the magic. But that was being cued in with the guy you're working with.
Right through the 80s, at that time of the morning.
Adrian Kennedy also worked alongside Joe,
where he had fierce competition from the big pirate stations, but also from Gay Burn on Radio 1. Joe was a celebrity in Bray on our small little radio station. And everything else was kind of built around what Joe was doing. And he was just a genius.
Ah, yes, as we used to say, RTE may have Gaybo, but we have Jobo. He was an inspiration to others on the station, including Daphne Mitchell.
Joe Bollard, watching him on the mixer inspired me to make sure that I knew how to do things. He was a magic person in himself. He really was. You know, good old Joe.
See, I wouldn't tell my listener a lie. I switched on the wrong turntable to start with.
I cringe when I think of it now. I'm off now. That's the last of my programme. I'm off for my rasher sandwich. I used to eat red meat then. I don't eat it now. But I'm off for my rasher sandwich now. Joe Bollard saying, till tomorrow, slán, and I'd be gone.
Next time on the BLB story, the fun of making radio.
Radio is hard. First of all, you have to think about what you're going to say and how you're going to plan it, how you're going to organise it, because you don't have any time to think once it's going. And then there is the fact that you're actually talking into a vacuum.
There was a yellow button and there was lots of black buttons. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember what the yellow button was.
My sincere thanks to all of the participants in this series. Sound recording was by Mike Quinn and sound mixing was by Luke Conlon, both of Highwire Post-Production, Dublin. BLB, Sounds from the Past, Memories of Pirate Radio and Stories of Bray Local Broadcasting was produced and presented by me, Mark Quinn, and is a Radiogenic production.